Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the FIRG session, the second in history of the FIRG sessions going virtual. And I'm delighted that all of you could join us today for this, what I think is going to be a fascinating discussion. As you know, our guest, Bill Cummings, has written a remarkable book. His wife, Joyce, has also joined us today. The book, I think it's fair to say that the Cummings Foundation is a joint work of both Bill and Joyce over the years as they worked together, as they gave money away together, as they empowered their community in so many different ways. The story about the the Cummings Foundation is fascinating, and we're going to hear more about it. And making giving at foundations more than simply the work of an inside staff or of the donors is something that many foundations aspire to and few of them achieve. And what Bill and Joyce have done basically is to create a new model that others can look at and see how to follow in their footsteps in doing giving that is enormously satisfying to the donors and enormously beneficial to the areas in which people live who receive support. So, it is with great pleasure that I welcome Bill and Joyce and also Bob Keefe, who is a longtime friend of Bill's, an associate who helped really make connections that brought this about. So in any event, welcome. And I turn the floor over to Bill now.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're here today, as most of you know, to talk about philanthropy. More specifically, we shall talk in a few minutes about how Cummings Foundation is democratizing philanthropy, or at least we're trying. We're democratizing giving away money. It's great to be with you all here in Durham today. And I certainly thank you, Professor Fleischman, Joel, for the kind invitation, first of all, to have been there in person if COVID hadn't interfered, and now to be with you all virtually. I thank everyone else here present for being a part of this presentation, for all that all of you are doing in your ways to really to make philanthropy better. And that's the objective that certainly that we are trying to have. One of the things that many of us have considered lately is the developing national pressure for foundations to share more of their economic power, is the way it's put by many. And many organizations are responding to that pressure by gradually changing the makeup of their governing boards. Going well beyond that, Cummings Foundation has developed procedures to directly share the economic power with great success. We're actively recruiting community assistance in our actual grant making itself. We've built a marvelous team of community volunteers. Volunteers have now independently distributed more than $90 million of Cummings Foundation's funds, almost all of that in the greater Boston area. I should tell you all about our volunteer-dominated $25 million annual community grants program. But first, I really need to tell you a little bit more about the Cummings organization as a whole. A wonderful Duke University alumna we have come to know quite well, by the way, through membership in the Giving Pledge, is Melinda French. Melinda French Gates of the class of '86. One of the three Giving Pledge founders. It's hard to imagine, but Melinda and Bill Gates, with their 2,000 or 3,000, however many people, colleagues they have in the foundation, have already saved millions of human lives, millions of lives, often in the most remote corners of the world. And such a wonderful example and motivation for everyone else. But that foundation gives away its funds, billions upon billions of dollars each year, and their success is absolutely phenomenal. By comparison, Cummings Foundation has a net worth now of perhaps $3 billion. Well, it's actually given away only its first 300 million. So we're real neophytes in this thing, but in our own local area, we're trying to, to really make a difference. We're so much less significant when compared with many others, but remember, even the poorest people can make significant differences in the lives of so many others. In our highly unique program, Cummings community volunteers are the ones who really do make the majority of all decisions of our new grant winners. It's spectacular how well they do it. Later, our very first volunteer, if you will, attorney Bob Keefe of the Boston firm of Wilmer Hale, who's almost retired. He keeps thinking he's retired anyway, who also happens to be a good friend of Professor Fleischman. And Bob will help me explain a little bit more about how our volunteer program works and some of the questions you might have during Q&A time a little bit later. We have more than 100 volunteers, most of whom my wife Joyce, who is also on the screen now, and most of whom she and I do not even know, but certainly we cherish the work that so many of them do. They do it so well. It really is they, rather than the foundation staff, who get to know the organizations we support. Altogether, there are now some 800 recipient charities, all of whom are in Eastern Massachusetts, who have received between $100,000 and $500,000 each. In self-writing and then publishing my book, Starting Small and Making It Big, I gave the book all of my spare time for close to 2 years, maybe even a little longer than 2 years. And then I went on a speaking spree, and I had a grand time. There were more than 100 talks, most of them in colleges, and to some of the best audiences. There were dozens and dozens of colleges in New England, and others as far south as University of Alabama and Tuscaloosa. And here I am today at Duke, and this is just wonderful. Live speaking venues have also included an international conference on entrepreneurship at the University of Oxford, a major event at the United Nations headquarters, and keynoting numerous annual meetings and similar events, primarily in New England. My wife Joyce and I have several times enjoyed serving jointly as college commencement speakers and also at the grand opening ceremonies of the University of Global Health Equity in Rwanda. Some of you have heard of that new facility, and we were delighted to build the first phase of this new medical university in partnership with Bill and Melinda Gates, and to honor, partly to honor the work of Dr. Paul Farmer. That name certainly will perk up the ears of many at Duke, I'm sure, as another of the most successful alumni, certainly. Paul is from the class of '82, and we're proud to call Paul our very good friend. Paul and Dee Dee Farmer's daughter, by the way, Catherine, is now a proud 2019 graduate of your fine university as well, if that hadn't been publicized. My only other Zoom lecture was to introduce a brand new business case study to students at Harvard Business School, just as they were going on, just after they went on to virtual classes last spring. And that is Bill Cummings, The Cummings Way. That's the name of the case study. And some of you who might have access to that might enjoy reading it. It's another version of Starting Small and Making It Big in some respects. I was certainly born poor during the Great Depression. My first home was a tiny one-bedroom flat above a liquor store and a laundromat. My sister and I shared the single bedroom. Our parents slept in the living room, and we both had a very happy childhood. My dad worked extremely hard, but he taught me so much, especially about things of work, about integrity, and about commitment. All of which, along with civility, seem so threatened today, don't they? perhaps more than any other single day so far, in our opinion. As a kid, I did so many things to make and save money. And when the time came, I managed to pay my own way through Tufts University, except that I did get a scholarship. You'll laugh at this one. My scholarship during my last year was $50. So that constituted my first gift back to Tufts the following year. My very first post-college job, I sold and marketed Vicks Vapor Rub for a great old Tri-Cities company, Vic Chemical Company. And I'm sure some of you know Vicks in Greensboro, North Carolina, now Procter & Gamble, I guess. But at that time, it was right out of Greensboro. My pay was $270. Now, that was not per hour in those days, of course, or per day either, or per week, but $270 per month. And I was very, very glad to have it. I had a new car and a 7-day expense account and a terrific training program, and I just absolutely loved it. Then I was recruited away, and I was selling frozen seafoods for Gorton's of Gloucester. Now I'm saying Gloucester in the perfect Boston accent. That's Gloucester, Gloucester, Gloucester. Finally, after these two great national jobs, the time came for me to become truly an entrepreneur, as I'd always wanted to be. I purchased a very old, very small food products company with almost no sales after 60 years in business, all but dead. I bought it for $4,000 and did extremely well. I rejuvenated it, and really I made a fortune selling old Medford fruit punch. I sold it almost exclusively for college dining halls at some 400 colleges and universities all up and down the East Coast. One of them that we liked especially was University of Puerto Rico, and the team would love to go there in the wintertime, of course, to service their accounts. But I could never understand why we were shipping old Medford fruit punch from Boston in the wintertime to Puerto Rico. That just didn't seem to make sense, but they did like it. Folks, there are always opportunities around. I had an opportunity, and I think the most important thing to remember about opportunities is we must recognize them when they come your way and then take advantage. Recognize the opportunities and then take advantage of them. The $1 million sales price I achieved for this once tiny old Medford Foods provided the capital to start an entirely different business, commercial real estate venture in 1970. We formed Cummings Properties and grew it to include a fine team now of several hundred colleagues with more than 10 million square feet of newly built or restored properties. Some of these slides will be of special interest. This building now showing is a great example of an old, really derelict structure to which we gave new life. The auctioneer who was selling it, the property with an adjacent building, saw fit to disclose ahead of time the approximate cost to demolish the building would be about $200,000. We thought that was ridiculous. We could restore the building. So here we have the exact same structure after 5 or 6 months of extensive, intensive care. We had a marvelous time with that, as we have with so many, but just making it the typical example of making a silk purse from a sow's ear. And those things were fun. Our largest salvage job ever, however, was the massive headquarters of United Shoe Machinery Corporation. Some of you lawyers, if any in the audience, will remember the large monopoly case that hovered over United Shoe Machinery Corporation for 80 years. And the property is in downtown Beverly, Massachusetts. The original asking price for this 2 million square foot complex was $90 million. Our first offer, and you can see in the picture how decrepit it is in the grounds, our first offer was the only offer we made. The price had come from 90 million down to 80 to 70 to 60 to $40 million, then to 20 million. And finally, the broker said, Bill, they've dropped the price to $10 million. But if you give us an offer, just even 5 million, I'll present it. And that's how we'll get you guys talking. The seller was Black & Decker. The amount we eventually paid to Black & Decker However, a year later was $500,000. So that's a 2 million square foot building. Now we've added to it a little bit, but on 100 acres of land or 95 acres of land, and the total price was $500,000. Today, that former Black & Decker owned property is called Cummings Center. We pay today 6 times as much in local annual real estate taxes as we paid to purchase the entire property in 1996. And the project supports some 5,300 good paying jobs. This picture you see here now is me in front of the property as it looks today with Ada Louise Huxtable. Many of you, or some of you certainly will recognize Ada Louise as the late architecture critic for the Wall Street Journal. And she had written about this property of United Shoe as the first, several times actually, over 3 or 4 decades, as the first reinforced concrete building in the country. And it certainly was the largest until Cooley Dam came along. I think the next picture you'll see here is our largest built from scratch campus. This is the 800,000 square foot Trade Center 128. It's right broadside from I-95 in Woburn, Massachusetts. And this is 100% designed and engineered and built for cash by our in-house team. By building or rebuilding more than 100 large commercial buildings in the near suburbs of Boston, we have quite a portfolio because we've never sold any. After Joyce and I founded Cummings Foundation in 1986, we gradually came to believe that how could anybody truly own anything? With our ever so brief stays upon this earth, how can we think of ourselves as actually owning property or owning land especially? How can we be anything more than caretakers of the ground beneath us? And that's the way we have continued to look at things. And we've all got a responsibility to be caretakers of whatever we might have and doing things worthwhile with whatever assets we have. So in addition to cash, we began donating real estate, such as the 2 million square foot Cummings Park property in Woburn and dozens of other large free properties. And it has been so extraordinarily satisfying. Cummings Foundation quietly built its endowment for a quarter century while staying mostly very private with all of our giving. It established its first full annual giving program in 2012, and we called it 100K for 200, $100,000 for 100 organizations rather. And we began awarding $10 million to the top local Boston charities. Each year, about 600 charities send 1 or 2 page letters of inquiry. And we line up volunteers to read and select the best of those and try to reduce the typical number of about 600 to about 300 as being the ones that are good enough to request a full application. The 300 applications are divided into batches that are carefully evaluated by 2 different volunteers who then discuss the applications and decide which half of them will advance as finalists. Finally, 100 or so outstanding award candidates are examined by 10 different final selection groups with 4 volunteers in each group to select 51% of all winners, at least 51%. It's a fascinating thing, and the volunteers are doing that work are so committed and so dedicated to doing it the right way, and they have just a wonderful rapport, and it's a fascinating thing to watch. Based partly on the budget size of all these charities, they all receive $100,000, but they receive it over 5 years or 4 or 3 or perhaps even 2 years at $50,000 a year. A few years after establishing the 100K, 100,000 for 100 program, We greatly added to our spring event by marketing or making with what we now call our Sustaining Grants Program. And that awarded an additional $10 million a year and provided follow-on support for the previous winners of the 100 for 100 and giving them support over a 10-year period. In 2020, this year, we combined these two programs and further increased the total volume to 25 million in the same tri-county area. All of the grants are very much geographically limited. Suffolk County in Boston, Middlesex County, and Essex County. We devised this entire program to be easily replicable for use in other geographies. This model is highly suitable for any other large metropolitan area. One unrelated foundation has expressed strong interest in possibly using something very similar to the program to supplement or even supplant its own hometown giving, if you will. Cummings democratized giving not only doesn't preclude any other giving parameters that we might choose to initiate, but it serves as a highly dependable reach out to the marginalized populations of the greater metropolitan area. For us, this area includes not only Boston, but as I mentioned, two other counties, and the designated gateway cities nearby being Lowell and Lawrence and Lynn, Massachusetts. The program has proven to be a superb model for sharing philanthropic economic power, and everything about it it feels so great to be a part of it and to communicate with the volunteers and to see what a marvelous job they do. You wouldn't expect it to happen, that it could be so solid, but there's never been a grant made yet that we questioned in any way. Today's event here with Duke University is really our first presentation of the program itself in any public presentation in any way. And it's we're proud to do it with Duke. One more thought, if you will, before I introduce Bob Keefe. Consider, if you will, please, what philanthropy is all about. And I offer just a couple of common goals. Ask you to be the force that helps to build bridges, especially for our marginalized neighbors. So much more than bridges over rivers and highways. Build bridges of love, build bridges of hope, and bridges of understanding. Let there be bridges of opportunity too, and let bridges such as these take us all to where we otherwise could not go. Folks, Bob is in an adjacent office here, not far from me. He's about to be retired attorney, a trial attorney for the New York and Boston firm, and nationally, I guess, Wilmer Hale, and as the very first volunteer who came along and said, I'd like to help. And now we have 5 key committee volunteers that run the different alumni, different groups of volunteers. But I'd ask Bob just to say a few words and tell us, I don't know what he's going to talk about, so here we go.
Thank you, Bill. Let me just thank Joel for setting this up. I appreciate the opportunity to talk. I'll give you a little background about myself and then talk about the Cummings Foundation. I actually grew up in Arlington, Massachusetts, which is next door to where Bill grew up in Medford, Somerville area. I attended the Arlington Public Schools. Upon graduation, I went to Exeter Academy for a year and then went on to Harvard. I graduated from Harvard in 1968 and then went on to Boston College Law School, graduating in 1972. Upon graduation from law school, I went to the Department of Justice in Washington for 2 years, but I returned to Boston in 1974 and joined the law firm of Hale and Dorr, where I remained. Hale and Dorr actually merged with Wilmer Cutler Pickering in the early 2000s and remained with the law firm until I, quote, retired, unquote, in December 2015. The law firm did ask me to stay on and help with a couple of cases, and I've been helping with a couple of cases since 2015. So I guess I am semi-retired from the law firm. But more importantly, I actually started to do work, Cummings Foundation, about 6 to 7 years ago. I began, literally, I met, I think it was Joyce Variotis, who gave me background on the foundation and asked me if I would be willing to review a, quote, few LOIs, letters of inquiry, grant requests. I liked Joyce, I liked the foundation, so I said, I'd be happy to review a few LOIs. And I think she sent me like 100 or 120. And I began to review the LOIs. And over the next 2 years, I reviewed hundreds of LOIs, reviewed the LOIs, reviewed all the background information on the nonprofits which submitted the LOIs, which is basically the grant request. And I made comments and gave grades to each of those nonprofit organizations seeking a grant and sent them on to the foundation. The first year or two, I think I was doing it all by myself. Since that time, we now have probably 40 to 50 individuals who have volunteered, and they review all the LOIs. I also reviewed applications. Company, we had 500, 600 nonprofit organizations apply for grants through the LOI process. We would reduce that to probably a couple hundred and then ask those organizations to submit an application. And we would review those applications. Again, I did that as well. And to show how it's grown over the last few years, we probably have another 50 or 60 individual volunteers who review those applications. And then after making that review, then we have committees of 40 to 50 people who also review and make recommendations on which nonprofit organizations should get the grants. And as Bill has told you, those committees, those 10 four-person committees that make recommendations, and the foundation follows those recommendations. It's interesting. The volunteers are regular people. They're doctors, they're appellate judges, they're accountants, they're plumbers, they're electricians, they're business people, they're lawyers, there are men, there are women, there are whites, there are blacks, there are yellow people, there are older people like me, but there are also younger people in their 20s and 30s. And all of these people have volunteered and come forward and said, I'll give time to try to help the foundation distribute. This year it'll be $25 million to nonprofit organizations in either Suffolk County, which is the Boston area, Middlesex County, which is a huge county, including Cambridge and Woburn and Winchester and Lowell, and Essex County, which includes places like Lynn and Lawrence and some of those cities up north. And that's what we've done. And then probably about 3 years ago, Bill Cummings came up with the idea of a sustaining grant. Very important concept. The 100K for 100 program was a terrific program. The sustaining grant program is even better. And hopefully it will be what other foundations and companies and corporations do in the future. Basically, the Cummings Foundation said, we have 100, 200, 300, 400 nonprofit organizations that we have vetted. They've received a $100,000 grant. They're doing great work in the community. What if we let them apply for a larger grant, and that grant will be paid out over 10 years? That will help these nonprofits because they will know they are getting money over a long period of time. I'm not aware of any other foundation that has done this in the past. So Bill came up with this idea, and about 3 years ago, the foundation actually gave me gave me the background on 100 nonprofit organizations. I reviewed them and made a recommendation for 20 organizations to be considered for a sustaining grant by the foundation. The foundation then asked me if I could review the 20 organizations more closely and make a recommendation on 5 recipients, which I did. I originally did it with a half a day to one full day telephone interview. I did not think I got enough information, so I told the foundation, I'm going to do a site visit, which surprised many people at the foundation because we had never done that before. And I did site visits over 2 months. I actually went and visited each organization for a day or two, sent in a report to the foundation, and made a recommendation. And later that spring, Bill and Joyce Cummings gave $500,000 to Commonwealth Kitchen organization in Boston, Generations Inc., education organization in Boston, Lawrence Community Works organization in Lawrence, UTEC up in Lowell, and Girls Incorporated Greater Lowell. All got $500,000 grants, and that started the Sustaining Grant Program, which has continued. It was interesting. Bill said, I remember talking to him that summer, he said, we got a lot of information from those site visits. I think we ought to do site visits for every organization. And I said, wow. I said, it took me 4 months by myself to do those site visits for 20. You'll need 50 to 100 people. And Bill said, no problem. And off he went, and he actually got somewhere between 50 and 100 people. And so today, literally, we are doing site visits at over 100 places. We have to do them this year virtually. Last year, we did actual site visits. We met with people, both who got sustaining grants and people who got 100K for 100 grant programs, grants, and they were able to, we get information and we store that information, and it's quite helpful. In closing, I would like to say, you know, I've spent a lot of time and energy on foundation work. People who know me say, wow, why do you spend so much time on that? You could be doing other things. And I said, well, it's become a labor of love. You know, if you look today, if you go to media reports, you look at television, you listen to the radio, you read newspapers, you go on the internet, I think, anyway, the whole world is going to Hades. However, I come back and I'll read an LOI, or I'll read some applications, or I'll read site visit materials, and I'll think about what all of these non-profit organizations are doing. And that gives me hope. I'm actually uplifted. Every time I think about these organizations and the work being done, it's inspiring, it's uplifting, it's positive. I feel that we're blessed in Boston to have so many individuals who are willing to help the less fortunate, people who are willing to educate the young, people who are willing to help house the homeless, people who are willing to feed the hungry, people who are helping victims of domestic violence, people who are counseling and assisting individuals who have physical and psychological and developmental disabilities. We have all sorts of these individuals in the Boston area helping, and it really is quite inspiring and positive. And so I've been doing this for 6 or 7 years. I feel I've been blessed. Blessed not only to know Bill and Joyce Cummings and the Cummings Foundation, but blessed to know all the wonderful people in these small and medium-sized nonprofits in Suffolk, Middlesex, and Essex County, helping less fortunate people live a better life.
Thank you so much, Bob. Cassie, how do we go from here with Q&A?
I'll just go in order and read this first one out, which no one can see. It was sent to me privately. I'm hearing more and more about trust-based philanthropy. Would you agree that your approach?
Well, there certainly is a heck of a lot of trust, and the trust that we're using is the trust in the volunteers that they just knowing them and coming to know them better all the time. And we're relying on what they see and what they feel and what they determine and the trust that they have, as opposed to any kind of heavy documentation of any sort. So I have not heard much about trust-based philanthropy, but that would be my interpretation, that you'd have to call this trust-based for sure.
That question came from Sue Priester. If Sue, you want to expound on that, feel free. If not, I'll go to the next question. This is from Mary Morgan. You are so fortunate to have so many dedicated volunteers to help with your grant making. How many paid staff members work for the Cummings Foundation?
Joyce Variotis should answer that one. Joyce is our deputy director of Cummings Foundation, which is itself a volunteer job. She's full-time, however, with Cummings Properties. So her answer is guided by the fact that many at Cummings Properties provide lots of pro bono service. But Joyce, how many paid employees?
We have just one. Joel Sweat's our executive director, and like Bill said, there are a number of folks who technically work for Cummings Properties who help out the foundation in a number of ways, but in terms of paid administrative employees, there's just one full-time person, and we're so grateful for the more than 100 volunteers who help us out. They're phenomenal.
Great. Okay. And the next question is from Francis Letham, professor here at Sanford. Bill, I loved your book and noted that you never did business plans. Now that you're asking proposals from candidate beneficiary organizations, are you asking from them, are you asking a business plan from them?
Francis, I think we need to go back here to the question of Mary's question about being trust-based. And it really is there. The application form itself, on which we base most decisions, along with which we think most of the volunteers base their questions, plus what they see on site visits. And all of our volunteers are encouraged to look into any requesting organization in whatever way they feel they need to do so. And that's often with a site visit on their own, or it's internet work, or they know them, or they're inquiring about talk to their directors. And it's very informal. And it'd have a very hard time in documenting what we're doing, other than what we hear from everyone in the receiving organizations when we talk to them. It's wonderful. It's just, we have no doubt about the veracity of what's happening. People have been looked at by just so many different organizations. When it comes time for the volunteers to make that final decision, they're looking at a group of people who is first of all evaluated with a computer rating. If they answer all the questions the right way on the application anyway, then the applications, their letters of inquiry are rated by another group of people. Then the applications themselves are ranked and rated to find out who the finalists will be. And then that last group that gets down to the final decisions, again, it will be a group of typically or almost always four individuals, and they will have they'll be asked, each of them will be asked to come up with 5 or 10 winners out of 10 or 11 applications that they will have. The groups will work independently. They start off, one person's the chairman for a year, and becomes the vice chair the following year, and is off after that. So they go through the chairs, so to speak. They serve 3 years, and in addition to the 3 outside members, non-employee or non-family people, there is one Cummings Properties person or a Cummings Foundation trustee who will work with the group, and they serve for 1 year only. So their vote is the same as everyone else's, and they're not cheering for anybody. And the volunteers, by the time someone has been on the committee for 3 years and is the chair of the committee that year, they set their rules, It's a little bit like a court hearing almost, the way they tend to do it. They get very understanding of what they need to do and come up with very good democratic type decisions. And we feel so good about it. Typically, if they've got 10 applicants, they'll quickly agree on the first couple. Then they'll be happy enough to agree on 2 or 3 that they'll exclude. When it comes time for the third decision, they'll get that pretty well. The 4th and 5th, they'll talk about it for an hour sometimes, go back and forth. And they've always reached a consensus, and they've formed wonderful relationships among the different groups of people. And that's just a camaraderie that works there very, very nicely. So there's not a lot of formula to it. And we don't do what many organizations, I'm sure that the members of the Giving Pledge get an offer and availability of hugely valuable information on how to do things. And certainly Giving Pledge, and I see the Saul family here, they would tell us that in a hurry, very quickly. Hi, guys. They would certainly know how much the Giving Pledge recommends that people really prove the results, that they look for ways to really rate results, and we just don't do that. Maybe we should, but the system really does work though right now.
The question was, you don't do a business plan, but do you require a business plan for the not-for-profits? And I think the simple answer to that is there's not a business plan required for the not-for-profits, but as part of the application process, they do spell out specific needs that they have, needs that they may have eminently right then and now, but also what they want to do in the future, what their needs are in order to be able to expand a program, some program for an after school. Maybe they have 25 kids and they want to expand it to at least 30 in the next year. So they would need more funds in order for that. So it's not that they just say, here we are, this is what we do, we do it really well and we need more money to keep going. It's quite more involved than that.
It's nice to have backup, Joyce. Thank you.
Perhaps I could speak as a volunteer. I know my name's Arlen Fuller. I'm a retired physician now, a surgeon and oncologist. I used to think taking care of cancer patients was hard, but sometimes taking care of the homeless and some of the vulnerable populations that we see is an extraordinary challenge. And you've heard Bob Keefe talk, and you may say, well, he's really enthusiastic. But that's the norm. I think it's really striking how much we get out of our work and how enjoyable it is. And it's everything from handing somebody a check to going to the basics of searching out the website, validating what they've recommended, and linking them in many cases to comparable organizations. Because as I've been doing this now for 7 or more years, you've seen 6 or 7 different organizations taking care of the homeless, for example, which is one of my interests, or food security. So you can help those organizations become more effective by helping them network with organizations that may be in the next county, yet they've never had any contact with the individuals. It's an extraordinary opportunity for which we are all grateful, not just for working with the organization, but for working with each other and getting to know Bob Keefe doing this project with, as we did a site visit last month, or working with people who have just doing their first site visit or looking at their first program. It's a wonderful educational process for all of us to share. And just one more thing about the sustaining grants that to me is important. My son used to work in Capitol Hill in Washington, and there's a tremendous difference between a representative and a senator, not the least of which is as soon as the representative gets into office, what's the first thing they need to do? They need to spend 1/3 of their time raising more money so they can get into the office the next time. And so is it true with a lot of nonprofits. They work very hard to get a grant for 2 or 3 years. And as soon as they get the grant, they have to start on the next grant. The idea that you can give someone a grant for 10 years takes a huge amount of stress off the organization and its executive director most commonly, because now they have some guarantee of stability, and that will help them with future fundraising as well. But it's a great organization for our volunteer staff. And, you know, one of the best things that's happened to Massachusetts is Bill and Joyce Cummings and their staff to be able to facilitate what we have the opportunity to do together. It's a remarkably rewarding process. Thank you.
Well said, Skip. And also, I want to also note that Heidi Heinlein is with us, and she's one of our volunteers as well, and she's doing a great job as well. So,
Bob, while you're up there, can I ask you a question? This is Joel. Why did you decide to go from not having any site visits to going to site visits? And what more did you get from site visits that you didn't get before doing the site visits?
Originally, I did telephone interviews, and the interviews lasted anywhere from 4 to 8 hours. So I learned a lot of information. Before I even did the telephone interview, I would have gone online, reviewed materials, I would have reviewed LOIs, applications, and done a lot of background. So I felt I knew a lot about each organization, and much of it was affirmed in the telephone interviews. However, I thought, you know, I would like to meet the individuals in person, and I'd like to see the actual work they're doing, and see whether what I've been reading about is actually happening. And so, I mean, I remember the very first site visit I did. It was a group, Mothers for Justice and Equality, and this was a group of a woman who lived in the Roxbury area of Boston. They happened to be all Black women who had lost a child to violence, and their organization was set up so that they could start to work with the school system, the police department, and local government to try to prevent future violence so that children would not be murdered in their community. It was the very first one I went to, and I sat down with the executive director, Mona Lisa Smith, and she explained what they did and how they did it. And she had 10 or 11 women there who explained how they had lost children, and they explained what they did in terms of dealing with the mayor, interacting with the police department, interacting with the school system, having programs set up to educate the young people about violence. When you hear that firsthand, you say, wow, that is much more compelling than just reading about it. And you also understand more by listening to what they're doing, how if they got a sustaining grant, how they could use the sustaining grant to help expand the work they wanted to do in the city of Boston. So I just thought I thought by meeting the people that would be involved with the nonprofit, you learn more about the nonprofit, and you also learn more about the people who ran the nonprofit. I think ultimately, when you make a decision on whether to give a grant or not give a grant, one of the things you have to think about are who are the key people involved with those nonprofits, and do you have trust in them? Fortunately, I've met a lot of people. First of all of the organizations that have applied for a grant for the Cummings Foundation are terrific organizations, and all are doing great work in the community. I can't stress that enough. I have not come across one organization that isn't helping the less fortunate. Now the question is, how do you differentiate one from another? I think one of the ways to do it, you have to have complete confidence in the leadership and the people in the organization. I think you learn more by actually meeting them in person.
Do you ask the recipients to conduct an evaluation of their work post-grant or to measure their outcomes?
Yes, we very much do that, and that's a requirement for that just doesn't ever fail. We don't make subsequent distributions. First of all, if they fail to submit that on a timely basis, and the performance reports are a pretty important part.
I'll add that the impact reports that we request every year are generally 1 to 2 pages. We like to keep them pretty brief because we know how busy these nonprofit professionals are and that they wear many hats. And so we want them to spend more time providing their services than writing reports, but they are required. And then we have yet another team of volunteer who reviews impact reports for us and alerts us to any questions for us or potential issues we might want to reach out to the nonprofit to discuss.
But also, I'll add one other thing too, sort of following up on what Joyce Cummings said. You may have an organization that, yes, is helping children, 25 children, they want to expand to 30 children. And that may be their goal, but after they get the grant, there may be issues that arise and they may have to switch and go off in a different direction. The good thing about the Cummings Foundation is the organization can contact the Cummings Foundation and say, we've had this change, can we use the money to do X rather than Y? And usually the foundation will say, fine. In other words, they really do try to work with the nonprofit so that the nonprofit has the most benefit for the people in the community.
Bill, or anyone, Joyce or Bob, my question is, to what extent are you finding people who are getting in line to want to join you all as volunteers? I mean, I would assume that the word gets out that, that this is an exciting thing you're doing, and people are learning from what they do, and they see the excitement that you have and all the other volunteers do, and they want to get involved in it. Are you keeping a list of people to ask to be volunteers in this effort?
We absolutely do, Joel. And it's not a question so much of a line as a list of interested people. And there are so many ways that we can use their help. And if they come in and do a small job and they do that well, then we want them to do a larger job. And we're looking to expand our site visits so they're not just the organizations that are receiving consideration for a grant at the present time, but we're looking to establish more with the volunteers to establish long-term relationships so that the same volunteers go back in subsequent years. And there are two committee members will typically go on each site visit, either whether it's virtual or on site for real. And that works out very nicely. Volunteers will have several times, probably 5 different times, included college presidents who wanted to be a part. And it's so important for presidents to be fundraisers. And that's such an important role for the president of any organization, especially a college. And to be on the other side of it, where they're giving the money and making those final decisions, they really love it. We've had a number of people who were grant writers or something who wanted to be on it just to see how we do it in that case, to see and to be able to understand better. So it's been very, very nice to have that opportunity.
One says, Mr. and Mrs. Cummings, thank you for sharing your time with us. And on behalf of my Tufts trained veterinarian, thank you for your animal philanthropy. This person does have great fur children. So
Nice.
So the question is, you mentioned your concern about civility in America today. Is there a role for philanthropy in shoring up our democratic norms and values?
We certainly hope so, and we go to a lot of trouble to make sure that the organizations that we're benefiting are going to disproportionately include people from inner city areas, inner city communities, and to try to reach out, particularly on the education side, to groups that are helping there, and particularly on anti-recidivism programs, which is another one that seems to be, lacking, and all with the idea of trying to provide the opportunities for the people who can make the world of difference in the increasing things like civility. And there's a lot of very qualified people working in that area, in the greater Boston area right now. And for us to be able to make a difference there is something that we're delighted to be a part of.
I was just working on preparation for a site visit tomorrow for the Council on American Islamic Relations, dealing with Islamophobia in Massachusetts. We have 130,000 Muslims in Massachusetts, and it is a huge problem right now with civil rights of these individuals. And this is a program that has been sponsored in the 100 for 100 program at Cummings Foundation for that very purpose of ensuring the challenges to civil rights, which have only increased in the past 2 years. It's a huge benefit. It covers virtually all aspects of bigotry, bullying in our state. It's a tremendous benefit.
One of the important things there is to have leaders in the communities of color who will come with us and help identify other volunteers who are really just beginning in philanthropy or involved in small organizations themselves, so they can see, in the course of their work with the foundation, they can see and hear the good ideas espoused by the organizations with which they're communicating. And they find that very worthwhile and very helpful. So it's just trying to bring people together in that atmosphere is really does work. It's extraordinarily rewarding for all of us.
Next question. With such a high-touch approach, do you often find yourself identifying potential funding partners who join you, formally or informally, in funding projects or groups?
Certainly not often. The most notable was the University of Global Health Equity, and that was something of which we're all very proud. And the university is located, as some of you may know, in extreme northern Rwanda, away from any cities, and it has a class about 25 students in each class on rural health delivery, really is what it comes down to, healthcare in rural areas. And then there's a 7-year full medical program with providing a degree in medicine and surgery. So the students are in the global health delivery group. I believe we're something like 29 students enrolled this year, including students from 24 different countries. So that was kind of spectacular. And the application program, or the applications for the University of Global Health Equity were something like 1 in 10 were selected for the full MD program. The dean of Harvard Medical School was one of those present at the dedication. The president of Tufts University was there. I believe that Duke has some substantial representation in Rwanda too. You familiar with that, Joel?
I'm not familiar with it. I know people who've spent time in Rwanda, but I don't know of anybody there right now.
I think there has been, or somebody is quite active. We've been particularly active there through the Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine. But in the situation of the University of Global Health Equity, it was a question of, we made a grant conditional on their raising a large number of millions of dollars elsewhere, And that didn't happen right away. So we were able to help to locate other people who wanted to match that. And it's worked out extremely well. And I don't want to publicize the names. Some of you might guess who that might be, but it's something that's been ongoing support in a significant way. And that's a university that's going to accomplish great things. And we're so proud of Dr. Paul Farmer, as I mentioned earlier, and the work that he and his organization, which is Partners in Health, headquartered in Boston, that they do in these most remote areas of the world. It's wonderful. And the University of Global Health Equity is certainly producing some very talented people to assist in that work, people who are not necessarily going to be best if they come from a North American or European medical school to go to work in rural areas of Kenya or Uganda or whatever it might be. But if they've learned the type of medicine that needs to be delivered in Africa or in remote South America somewhere, they're going to be probably much better trained for the work that they'll be doing. And that's what happens there. So that's where we've had a couple of partnerships like that nature. But for the most part, we're not looking for funding for the work that we do. 100% of a full 100% of all the profits of Cummings Properties go to the foundation as its endowment. So the issue really is making intelligent choices and being able to keep up with the right organizations to really make a difference as we continue to make gifts and make grants.
I'd love to hear more about the process of how the volunteers are recruited. Also, could you speak to the benefits, besides saving on administrative costs, of this model? Having a diverse range of volunteers from the community serve as reviewers of grant proposals, both for the applicants and the volunteers themselves.
Keep in mind that this was a gradual process. So we started with our trustees helping us make decisions. Bob Keefe was integral in the beginning, and then it started with friends of Bill and Joyce and associates of Cummings Properties, owners of businesses that lease from us, and gradually grew. And then it was important to us to ensure that we had diversity. And we reached out to some associates for recommendations in some cases. And a lot of our volunteers now come from our current volunteers. They're talking about what they're doing and how meaningful it is and rewarding. And one of their colleagues says, hey, I have some free time. I'd love to get involved with that. And so we enjoy having that recommendation from someone who knows Cummings Foundation, what the position is like. And so that's primarily where the volunteers have come from. And people really consider it an honor to be a part of. I think people think, oh, how fun to give away money. And then they become involved and realize this is really challenging. it's tough work, but and that's why we're so happy that they're helping us make these challenging decisions. And in terms of the benefits, there's certainly the lower overhead, but also we benefit so much from the vastly different experiences, backgrounds, expertise that our volunteers bring. Like Bill said, we've had college presidents, we have surgeons, we have nonprofit professionals, we have people who live in the inner city, who live in the suburbs, and so to hire that kind of staff would be very challenging. So we really value their expertise, and I think they learn so much about what's happening in their backyards that they didn't know about. That's something that we hear a lot. Wow, I thought I knew about the issues in my community, but I had no idea about this great nonprofit or this really serious need that they're meeting. And our volunteers turn into ambassadors for these nonprofits. They go on a visit or read an application and start talking to their friends about it, and they spread the word about the great work of these nonprofits. A lot of our volunteers, we hear after the fact, make donations of their own because they just fall in love with these organizations. So we feel like it really spreads philanthropy throughout the community.
I think I'd like to ask one. I see another Boston area volunteer on the screen right now. I know there are a lot that we can't see, but and not right now, Heidi, but before the end we close. Heidi Heinlein gives such a wonderful talk from the perspective of what it's like to be a volunteer for the foundation. I happened to hear her last week ago today, and talking and telling somebody what it was like. So I'll ask Heidi, can you be thinking about that a little bit, and before they don't let them cut you off before the end?
It's easy to talk about. It truly is the best part of my day whenever I'm doing something with the Cummings Foundation. I mean, every site visit, every volunteer you meet, it is so inspiring. You just I love what Bob said about there's a lot in the world today that's not hopeful, and everything you do with the foundation is hopeful, is inspiring, and the way that Bill and Joyce have set this up, that they make it easy for the if you've worked for I have a earlier background in nonprofits, they're so busy, they're so overwhelmed that to get some grants that there's pages and pages, and the way that they do a small thing first to get your interest, and if then move on to something that's a little bit bigger as far as an application, they really take into effect the what the leaders of these nonprofits are going through, respect them, make it easy for them. So it's just a joy to be involved with this. It truly is. You just can't help smiling when you're meeting any of these people. So
Thanks,
I highly
Heidi.
recommend it.
Mary, let me jump ahead, and Mary Morgan, and I see your question right at the bottom, if I can jump in on that one. And I will tell you, I'm making more references to the Giving Pledge than I might have expected to make today. But the question really is, does the grant-making group have a name, such as advisory committee? And does it have a governance structure, bylaws, or operating procedures, question mark? Who decides who will be president of the group? We're much more modeled, accidentally more modeled on what happens in the Giving Pledge. I will tell you that, and the Sauls, I think, would endorse this very quickly, that there's not only no rules or regulations, I've never seen a vote taken. I have no idea in the world of who sets the meetings up or how it happens. It just happens. Everybody gets together, makes things happen. There are no officers. There are no rules to follow other than maintain discretion at all times and just do things and make them happen. And we tend to work much more that way. And there are no officers in these groups at all. We have our 5 committee chairs. Another one who's Joel. I don't know if I mentioned to you that Susan Solomon is also one of our 5 chairs. We have 5 committee chairs.
Yeah.
She's one of our 5 volunteer chairs. And Susan is another good friend of Professor Fleischman, by coincidence, from the Boston area here, the wife of former Ambassador Alan Solomon.
I would also add Joyce Variotis and Christina Berthelsen. Those are the 2 key people at the foundation. Both of them save me from myself often. There may be no presidents, but whenever there's an issue or problem, I always call Joyce or Christina, and they always help out.
Okay, now the last question here. Your democratic approach to grant making seems to benefit from a geographic constraint. To what extent could the democratic approach work well across a whole state or beyond?
It would be more difficult, but a state would be a reasonable thing to envision, certainly, to do it the way that we do it in more than commuting distance away from the volunteers, unless we all get very good at Zoom meetings, would be pretty tough. And we're not there yet, certainly.
Bill, it occurs to me, we and I talked about Paul Grogan. A lot of the things that you are doing, which seem to me to be natural recipients of grants from the Boston Foundation or from the donor advised funds of the Boston Foundation. And I just wondered whether you have found that to be true. I mean, I know that Paul has great respect for you. I don't know whether one of the things that you might do, I mean, is when you run across something, an organization that needs more money than you think you can afford to put into them, do you ever go to Paul, or you feel comfortable going to Paul and saying, you know, Paul, you should take a look at this. It's something that you all may be interested in.
Absolutely. And as much the other way, Boston Foundation had created something akin to the Common Application for College, where each college would take the same basic form and then add to it. And we adopted and publicized that we would be very happy to use the form established by Boston Foundation as the common application for forms. Cummings Foundation is one of 3 organizations, along with Boston Foundation, which are all about the same size. Our net assets are about the same size. They do a lot of proactive work itself and sponsor a good many very good programs that serve the city of Boston and the greater metropolitan area. And for the most part, we operate 2 large assisted living communities, and we operate the foundation owns the Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine, actually. But other than that, we're supporting other organizations and not actually doing the work for the most part. And Boston Foundation does a lot more with their people right there and organizationally in the community, and they influence a lot of things in the city of Boston in a for the benefit of the community type way. So they've got 100 employees or something like that. The last time I looked a few years ago, but I noticed it was something of that, professional employees. And we obviously do it altogether differently there, but they're a highly respected organization along with Bar Foundation. All about the same size, but all very different.
You know, it occurs to me that it would really be a major addition to many community foundations around the country to consider trying to adopt your model in their localities, because it's a great way of spreading, of gaining more people to focus on the issues that are in core. You think about if you defined what the basic purpose of your foundation is, it's really to benefit people who need help in the community and to figure out how to go about doing it and to get good judgments about which ones to do how much with. That's the mission of virtually every community foundation of any worth in the country. And the ones that do the best job of it, strike me, could very easily benefit very significantly from the model that you've built by reaching out, having the president of the foundation or the chair of the foundation or a committee of the foundation board say, you know, why don't we try to assemble a group of people who will in fact help us in the same way that your volunteers are helping you all. It strikes me that the missions are so beautifully aligned. The great contribution of community foundations historically in the country has been to help focus people with wealth on the needs of people who need help, who need wealth, who need help. And that was the founding motivation of the Cleveland Foundation 100 or so years ago. And it's the model that many foundations, community foundations, use. But it seems to me that if they could augment and sometimes maybe even replace some staff by volunteers who get all excited like the volunteers whom you were on this program and many others are about what they're doing, it strikes me as a great way for community foundations to strengthen their whole functioning in a way, and it's totally aligned. The missions are really aligned.
We would love to share with anybody any information we can, certainly, and it's something that is it's a method of doing things that works. Another thing that we do, which works in an entirely different way, unrelated to that, is our employee giving at Thanksgiving. was started out that way. And every employee, we've got altogether some 600 or so employees, gets either $1,000 or $2,000 each year at Thanksgiving time to give to any organization, local organization that they want. And that program gets such an inordinate amount of publicity, and it's, you know, it's half of a, no, it approximates maybe one of our 100 for 100 grants, but it's spread out in such a way by so many people. And I think that's the ideal way for any corporation to think about giving in their community. If the employees in the firm are responsible for making the money, if for whatever reason the organization is paying as much as it feels it should pay to the employees, to give them that added benefit and let the employees be the ones who pick up the opportunity just to designate the winners of $1,000 grant. And you know, it really, they're thrilled with it. And I talk about that in the book. That's enough there that it's something that really works though. And there will be more books and more books available. If somebody who's watching now didn't receive a book or they signed up too late, we'll be more than happy if you let Cassie or Joel know. There'll also be books at their office, since there'll be some inventory there.
Right.
But that particular program is well covered in that in the book, and it's really a worthwhile program.
I saw that Debbie Bussell expressed a comment. Do you want to make it publicly, Debbie?
Yeah, this is so inspiring to hear the work of the Cummings Foundation and the engagement of so many people in the philanthropy, both from the giving end and the receiving end, and the whole, it's very inspiring. I have seen some similar things like this, you know, in the women's funding movement. A lot of women's funds have really, and I don't know, I'm not familiar enough within Boston, if the women's funds there similarly are, part of their mission was to connect women who had the capacity, ability to give to the needs in the community. It's actually, you know, embedded in their mission. So a lot in the women's funding movement parallels some of what I've heard from you today. And similarly, but in, I guess, at a different scale, giving circles. Many of all of those also are largely started, and the participants are women. But the giving circle field, or whatever, however you want to call it, which is growing and is similarly, you know, if it could be brought to scale, and I know some folks at Gates Foundation and others are looking at that, Melinda Gates, seriously, but you have some partners, I think, in this model that could reinforce each other.
No, we certainly applaud them all. There's so many organizations doing wonderful things that, you know, we just don't hear about and don't need to hear about really, but they're so effective in what they're doing.
There's someone else who messaged me privately asking concerning your volunteer model. Have you created resources or toolkits to help other foundations replicate this model?
Not per se, but we have talked about it as recently as yesterday about putting something together. And Joyce, would you comment on that?
Yes, we're definitely working on that. We have chatted with other organizations who have reached out and expressed interest, and we're always happy to do that. And like Bill mentioned, we were just talking about that, putting something down on paper that we could share electronically with folks to make it as easy as possible to take it and translate it to the work that they do.
I've certainly learned a lot, and it's been extremely stimulating. And I'm bubbling over with ideas as usual after an inspiring conversation. So I intend to follow up on some of these things. But meanwhile, you know, I want to say, Cynthia Baker, you just entered a note. Do you want to say anything?
Hi, Joel. And Bill, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. As I said in the note, it's just really inspiring, and it's really refreshing to think about new and more meaningful way to help communities and to share what you and your wife have accomplished in your lives. So I just feel really happy to have been part of this discussion. Thank you.
Really does unlock a potential in communities, because I cannot help but believe that there are many people of goodwill who, if they had the opportunity to join in an effort of this sort, would be able to do an enormous amount at no cost to anybody except their time. But in any event, it is 6 o'clock, and I need to thank Bill and Bob and Joyce, the Joyces, participating. Fascinating program. I want to, my last function is to say, remind you all that we have 2 more FIRG sessions. October the 21st, Dr. Elizabeth Alexander, president of the Andrew Mellon Foundation, was a former faculty member at Yale, an English professor and poet. She will be speaking on October 21st. And then on November the 18th, Nancy Rube, the president of the Edna McConnell Clark Foundation and the founder of such things as the Blue Meridian Fund for dealing with particular problems in the field of nonprofits. So I thank all of you for joining in from wherever you are, and I hope that everybody stays well, keeps safe, and will be around to join us and other worthwhile things later on throughout the year. And I thank especially Bill and Joyce for coming and all that Bob Skeef did to help bring this about. So thank you all. Have a wonderful evening, and I hope to see many of you again soon. Thanks very much.